Okay, welcome. It's so great to see all of you at the beginning of fall quarter 2023. This is the Tech Policy Lab Tech Talk. For those of you who don't know the Tech Policy Lab, we're a unit on campus that spans the School of Law, the Information School, and Computer Science and Engineering. I'm not sure if there's someone in the back, but it sounds like, is there an echo happening? Maybe a little bit. Okay, so I'll stand out here. And I'm super excited that this is our 10th year, and what a great way to kick off our 10th year of the Tech Policy Lab with Kashmir visit. Kashmir Hill is someone who, I want to say two things. They're synergistic. One needs no introduction, but at the same time, super deserves an introduction. She's a writer with the New York Times, but one of the things that when I think about, I was trying to think about an analogy this morning about kind of, the technology landscape, privacy and security. The analogy that came to my mind was that of like on the ocean with an immense fog and lots of dangers all around. And Kashmir's work on her writing is kind of illuminating the spotlight to try to help us avoid these dangers. Now, these dangers are ever present, and so this work is continuing, of course. But Kashmir's work has talked about face recognition, the book Your Faces Belong to Us, AI surveillance, genetic analysis, online reputation. And I guess you're also an experimentalist. Like one of the things I enjoyed was your 2018, I think, or so TED Talk, where you lived in an immersive home with like 18 or so IoT devices. I might have the number somewhat incorrect. But anyway, it is a great pleasure that we were able to host Kashmir here today. And with that, I'll hand over the microphone. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Yoshi. It's really amazing to be here. I really appreciate the Tech Policy Lab bringing me out. I'm going to try to move up here and see if it makes the echo go away or whatever you're doing. And yeah, can you still hear me? Great. And yes, I'm sure that the pizza delivery driver is kind of wandering around the University of Washington campus trying to figure out where to bring it. And I'm completely unoffended if when the pizza gets here, you just get up and go get some food. It won't distract me. I have two young children. Oh, it's here. I have two young children, so I'm used to just kind of just working through it. But yeah, so I am a privacy reporter. I've been writing about privacy and technology for over a decade now. I started, I think, around 2009 when I started a blog called The Not So Private Parts. And it was all about the way that privacy actually intersected with the law, because I had been a blogger at Above the Law, writing about the legal industry and lawyers and judges and law school students, and just kind of almost backed into becoming a technology reporter because so many of the intrusions on privacy were happening because of new tracking technologies, from cookies to face recognition, though back then in 2009, face recognition was not very good, but it has gotten a lot better. So I was going to talk about my book today a little bit like I want you to think about kind of a heist film where there was this company that kind of made off from the internet, took 30 billion faces and created this kind of astounding facial recognition app. And so I want to talk about who the company is, how they did it, and whether they're going to get away with it. And so first, let's talk about how this all got started. So as I said, I've been writing about privacy for a long time. In the fall of 2019, I got a tip from a source I'd known for a few years who was also interested in privacy and security. And he was a public records researcher based in Washington, D.C. And he was really interested in how police were using facial recognition technology. And so he had sent out public records requests to police departments around the country, asking who they were using and how much they were paying for it. And he just wanted to kind of understand the landscape. And as far as people knew at that point, police were using facial recognition, and they tended to be using it on government databases. So criminal mugshots in all the states, and then sometimes, state driver's license databases and IDs. And so we just wanted to figure out, how prevalent is this? And he got this really surprising response from the Atlanta Police Department. It was a 26-page PDF. And when he opened it up, this was the first page that he saw. It said privileged and confidential at the top, which is a pretty exciting thing to get in a public records request. And he usually they're pretty boring and they're all covered in like black, where everything's been blacked out, so you can't read it. But it was written by Paul Clement, who is an expensive and pretty famous lawyer, now in private practice at Kirkland and Ellis, but a former US Solicitor General. And he was talking about this company that Freddie had never heard of before called Clearview AI. And he was describing what they had built and what it could do. They said that they had scraped billions of photos from the public web, including social media sites like Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. And they had done this without anyone's consent. To create an app that they claimed worked with something like 98.6% accuracy. And they were selling it to the cops. And the memo said that hundreds of police departments were using the technology at that point. But the reason Paul Clement had written this memo was to tell cops, it's okay if you use this. Don't worry, you won't be breaking the law. Just was kind of true. And so Freddie saw this memo and he just thought, I know Cash is going to be interested in this. And so send it along. And I was in Switzerland when I got it, doing a fellowship program, and everyone was out drinking. It came in around midnight. I was very pregnant, and so I was about to go to bed. But as soon as I got this email, I read that and I called Freddie and I was like, I'm really interested. I'm out of the country, but I would love to talk when I get back. And thus began my my quest to find out who is Clearview AI, because I had never heard of it before. And I reached out to experts and no one else had ever heard of it before. And there was very little about the company at that point on the internet. There was a very bare website. And it was just Clearview.ai with a motto, what was it? Our artificial intelligence for a better world. And you could enter your email address and get more information. And then there was a little address. And it was actually based in Manhattan. And when I mapped it on Google Maps, it was only a few blocks away from the New York Times office. And so I ended up trying to walk over there at one point because I couldn't get anybody from the company to respond to me. So I thought I'll just, go to their front desk. And when I got to where Google Maps said the office should be, the building just didn't exist. It just wasn't a real address. I searched on LinkedIn. They had one employee on LinkedIn. His name was John Good. And he had 2 connections and no history, no experience. And I thought, this doesn't really look like a real person. But I sent that person a message, never got a response. And so part of this book is I kind of dig into, I explained the investigative journalism that went into finding out who they were. And I did eventually discover who was involved and found out the name of the technical co-founder, and it was Juan Tontat. And when I Googled him, like these images at the bottom were what came up. And I was like, oh man, this is the guy who scraped billions of photos from the internet to create this crazy app that he's selling to the cops. He turned out to be a person who had grown up in Australia, very into technology, very into computers from a young age. At 19 years old, he dropped out of college and moved to San Francisco. It was 2007 and the kind of tech boom was happening. And he was just doing, just trying to like make it in the tech industry. Facebook had just opened itself up to third-party developers. So it was, making quizzes on Facebook, trying to go viral like Farmville. The iPhone came out. So we started making these little kind of games for the iPhone. Kind of just trying to make it. And he told me that when he moved to San Francisco, it was, very liberal, and he ended up falling in with a liberal crowd. He let his hair grow long. He loved playing guitar. He would hang out with musicians and artists. But then he, around 2015, moved to New York, and the kind of his trajectory totally changed and he fell in with a much more conservative crowd. He would later tell me that he was radicalized by the internet. He was reading a lot of Breitbart, following people like Milo Yiannopoulos, and he met this guy up here at the top left, Charles Johnson, who was a conservative provocateur. A lot of people describe him as an internet troll. He had like an investigative news site that would look into police shootings and determine that, actually the victim was responsible. And the two of them decided to go to the Republican National Convention in 2016 when Trump was going to become the candidate. And this is where as I understand it, it was kind of the genesis for the company that became Clearview AI. And they were walking around and just saying, wouldn't it be great if you had a smartphone app where you could just hold it up to a stranger and learn more about them, kind of understand them, decide whether you want to know them or you don't want to know them. And so that's where it kind of started, was in this political environment. How do you tell friend from foe? It looks like all the food is out, so just quick break if you want to go get some food. Maybe we could start with this part of the room, maybe on the left, like you guys go, and then just move over so not everyone's standing in a line. No, I'll take breaks and then direct the next part of the room to go over there. And if you're starving, then just go. You don't have to listen to me. And so after this conference, Charles Johnson sends an email. He lives on the West Coast. Juan Tontat is in New York. And he sends an email to the guy at the top right. This is only, ironically, this guy, Richard Schwartz. He's a little older. He worked for Rudy Giuliani when he was mayor of New York. He only has 2 photos on the internet, which are very easily findable photos, because he actually believes, I think, in being quite private. But Charles Johnson connects Richard Schwartz and Juan Tontat and says, we should work on something together. And so as part of the book, I found out that in the early days, they weren't just thinking about, let's make a facial recognition app. They actually had more radical ideas about how you could analyze the face. And they were thinking that you could basically kind of data crunch faces to figure out people's personality types and inclinations. And so they were passing around research about like the gaydar research that kind of was around a while back. This idea that you can just tell somebody's sexual orientation from how their face looks. The idea that you could tell how intelligent someone was just from their facial features. The idea that you could know if somebody is a criminal or not. And these are ideas that go back to kind of Victorian age science. This idea that of physiognomy and phrenology, that who we are manifests in our physical characteristics. And there's been people who keep trying to combine these things with AI. There have been a few studies now where researchers will take a whole bunch of faces of criminals from mugshots and try to train the AI to recognize what a criminal face looks like. And then they'll take normal people's photos from like Facebook and then have the AI look at the photos, and they'll say, well, look, it's having a 85% accuracy rate in identifying who's a criminal and not a criminal. And these studies have have been heavily criticized because it's very possible the AI is good at recognizing when a photo was originally a mugshot. No matter how you crop it. But one of the ideas that they talked about in the early days was it was right around the time of the Ashley Madison data breach. Does everyone know what Ashley Madison is? So it's like an extramarital dating site. And so they said, oh, well, let's take all the names of the people that were using Ashley Madison. We'll look them up on Facebook, download their faces, and then we'll know what a cheating face looks like. So they had some pretty crazy ideas in the early days, but eventually they migrated over to more towards the idea of facial recognition. And so in those early days, they were just thinking, where do we get faces? And when they were thinking about this kind of criminality stuff, they were talking about downloading databases, collections of faces of people on death row, But yeah, they just basically started crawling the internet and getting a lot of faces. And when it came to getting a facial recognition algorithm, what is interesting is how kind of accessible that technology had gotten. And they were able to take, basically, the book talks about the decades of research that had gone into facial recognition, people just working over time to make it better and better. And, nowadays it's just very easy to get your hands on very sophisticated algorithms. And so Juan Tontat told me one of the first places, he was kind of laughing at himself because I was like, how did you do this? You were making Facebook quizzes and iPhone games and an app called Trump Hair that put Trump's hair on people's photos. Like, how did you build this powerful facial recognition app? He says, well, it's going to sound like I Googled flying car and then did it. But that's kind of what happened. He said, I just was looking for research that was out there in academia that had been done. He said one of his initial resources was a GitHub repository called OpenFace, and it had been developed by a group at Carnegie Mellon. And it was just, an open source face recognition algorithm. And it's not the one that they ultimately, it's not the primary part of their technology, but it was one of the first ones they used. And when I went to go look it up on GitHub, I noticed that at the very bottom, it says, please use responsibly. We do not support the use of this project in applications that violate privacy and security. We are using this to help cognitively impaired users sense and understand the world around them. And so for me, this just raises questions about the degree to which we can control these technologies once they're open source, and kind of relying on these types of requests to try to make sure that technologies are used ethically. If the middle section wants to go ahead and get your pizza, please feel free. But yeah, so and this is going to be a factor, I think, with other areas in AI. As these things become open source, we need to anticipate that the kind of most radical actors are going to come along and use the technology. In terms of getting the photos, there's a lot of photos on the internet, and Juan Tontat essentially hired face hunters to go out and download faces for him. He kind of put it out in different online communities that he's really interested in faces. And he said he'd just have people who'd be like, well, I've scraped, AngelList and couch surfing, and I'm willing to sell you these faces if you want them. And he said he would often not know the names of the people that would offer up faces to him, and he would just pay them in cryptocurrency, and they didn't know what they were selling it to him for. But it was a very scrappy collection of faces. And he also did scraping himself. And he told me that one of the first places where he got a lot of faces was Venmo.com. And so this is a screenshot of Venmo from around this time back in 2017. And on the main page, they had this iPhone. And at the time I was writing the book, this used to show the actual transactions from that time. It's changed. I don't know exactly why, or maybe somebody there read the book. But this used to show active transactions that were happening on their network. It would be like Kashmir, paid Kate, and it would have our names and a link to our profiles and our photos there. And this is interesting to me as a person who's covered privacy for a long time, because there were so many advocates, privacy activists who criticize Venmo, because when you sign up for Venmo, all of your transactions are public by default. And if you don't want the kind of whole world to see them, you need to go into your privacy settings and make that change, which I definitely encourage you to do if you haven't. Otherwise, anyone can see what you're sending. And the criticism from activists is that, it's encouraging people to put their information out there in a way that could be used against them. And there were examples of people, paying for drugs and having when you use Venmo, you have a little comment field where you can say what you're paying for. And so people would pay with a little syringe or marijuana leaves. And this actually came back to haunt some people when law enforcement found it. But this was really useful for Juan because there were so many Venmo users that were publicly transacting. And so he made an automated script that would just hit Venmo.com every few seconds and pull down photos and pull down the link to the Venmo profile. And so actually the first version of Clearview AI, at the time it was still called Smart Checker, was essentially a way to find somebody's Venmo account. You would take a picture of them and it would use the algorithm to look through its database of Venmo photos, and then it would pull up their account, pull up their photo, and you could click through and get to their account. And so just really a lesson in how these decisions that technology companies make, that social media companies make to encourage us to be public, the way that they're making our data available for anybody who comes along and decides to scrape it. There are also many other repositories of data and faces. One of them was actually here at University of Washington. There was a challenge called Megaface. It was an attempt by professors here to kind of test people's facial recognition algorithms and how well they worked. And so the professors here did a curated database of faces from a larger database that had been made available by Yahoo of public Flickr photos. And so it had a bunch of faces in it, and the idea, and it was kind of sorted by account. And so you had a whole bunch of photos per one identity. And the idea was for companies like Facebook and Google to run their, use this as a testing data set, and you could say how accurate you were at identifying people. But when I did a public records request from UW, I did see everybody who had downloaded the Megaface database, and it was a lot of different companies. ByteDance from TikTok had downloaded it. Something called Shopper Track, which is like a data brokering site, the Turkish police. It had been used by a lot of people, and it also included Juan Tantat. He had downloaded it when he was with Smart Checker. So they had a lot of photos. So they have this facial recognition algorithm, which is basically kind of available to people who are technically savvy. They have all these photos, which have not been well protected by technology companies. So why is it that Clearview AI did this before anybody else? And that was kind of one of the things that I'm trying to interrogate in the book, why them? And, what I found out about facial recognition technology is that Clearview AI was not the first person to do this. And in fact, it had been done by the big technology companies. Google, as early as 2011, Eric Schmidt, the then chairman, said that this kind of facial recognition technology for identifying a stranger was the one technology that Google had developed and decided to hold back. That was back in 2011. I think now there's some other technologies they've held back. Facebook in 2017, a bunch of engineers, I got to watch a video of this, which was pretty incredible. A bunch of Facebook engineers in Menlo Park were demonstrating this app that they had worked up. One of them is wearing a baseball cap, and he's got his phone on the brim, kind of standing up. And when he looked around the room, when the camera settled on a face, it would just speak the name. And he looks at another engineer in the room, and it says Zach Howard. And so even these companies that I don't think we think of them necessarily as being careful when it comes to privacy or kind of holding back on changing the norms of our expectations. Google, for example, sent Street View cars out into the world that mapped everyone's homes and put them on the internet. Even they thought that facial recognition was a bit too radical to put out there. So they had sat on it and decided not to release it. And what Clearview AI did wasn't a technological breakthrough. It was what I call arbitrage in the book. They were willing to do what others weren't. And I think that's a challenge for regulators, because you need to think about not just the big tech companies that get a lot of scrutiny for their practices, but also these smaller companies that really have, nothing to lose, everything to gain. The other thing that allowed Clearview to do what it did was investors willing to back them. So in that first slide that I showed you, Juan Tontat and Charles Johnson were at the RNC, and they actually privately met with Peter Thiel there, very famous investor. And they all commiserated about Gawker, which was a place that they didn't like very much, that Peter Thiel had recently helped to bankrupt and kind of shut down. But Peter Thiel ended up being their first investor when they first had kind of a working prototype of an app where you could take a photo of somebody and it would bring up their social media accounts. They reached out to him and said, would you be interested in supporting us? And so they got their first $200,000 from Peter Thiel. And then there were other people. That's Hal Lambert on the left. He lives in Texas. He's another pretty conservative investor. He's kind of known for creating a MAGA ETF that only invests in conservative-minded companies. And then in the middle there is David Scalzo, who was based in New York at the time. And, I met with David Scalzo. I talked to him a lot, actually, for the book. And he just said, his belief is that privacy is over, that there's just so much information that's available now that there's nothing we can do about it, that you can't ban the technology, and we just need to accept this future that's coming. And, he wants to be the one that profits from it. And he was telling me, I first found out about Clearview AI, they were only being used by police as far as I knew. But he said, that's not this company's plan. They want to work with everybody. They want to work with companies. They want to work with individuals. I hope that pretty soon, everyone in the world has the Clearview AI app on their phone. And the same way that you Google somebody, you'll Clearview their face. I talked to other investors who knew about Clearview AI and who didn't invest, who felt that it was, they had concerns about the legal risk for what Clearview AI had done. If you haven't gotten food over here, please get it. They were worried about the legal risk, and they also felt like the database they created was unethical, and they weren't sure that they wanted this kind of power brought into the world. The last thing that they needed to make Clearview AI successful was users. And so when Juan Tontat and Richard Schwartz first kind of put the company together, started having this working facial recognition app, they weren't sure actually who they would sell it to or how they would make money off of it. They just thought, this is a great tool. And so initially they were approaching private businesses. They thought that's where they would make more money. And they were approaching investors, hoping to get funding. And so one of the things they would do when they approach somebody like Hal Lambert or David Scalzo is say, here's the app, use it on your phone. And so this was one of those times where the future kind of came first for people who were the wealthy and more powerful. And so one person I talked to who got Clearview AI really early was John Katsimatidis, who you can see there in the New York Post. He owns a grocery store chain in New York. And so they had originally approached him about putting Clearview AI in his stores to try to deter shoplifters. But he did get it on his phone. And I said, well, how did you use it? And he told me about how he was at an Italian restaurant in Soho in New York one night, and his daughter walked in and she was with a man that he didn't recognize. And he said, so I had the waiter go over and take a photo of them. And then I ran his face through Clearview, and then I knew exactly who he was. And it was just kind of astounding to see all the different ways that this kind of app might be used if it's spread around. When Juan Tontat and Richard Schwartz were approaching private businesses, one of the people they talked to was a commercial real estate company, and they were getting vetted by the director of security, and he was a former NYPD officer. And he said, the app seems great. I'd really like to introduce you to my former colleagues. I think they would love something like this. And that is how Clearview AI ended up getting their first police user. They met with the NYPD. And this was very surprising to me as a reporter. I didn't realize that police could just start using any random technology actively in investigations, but that is what happened. Clearview gave NYPD free trial accounts. It was supposed to be for 30 days. It ended up going on for many months, and many officers there started using it. It was especially popular with financial crimes investigators because they would have a photo of somebody at an ATM or at a bank counter, and they just started like running these people's faces and using it to identify suspects. And they told their friends at the NYPD. And so through public records request, all these emails came out, and you just see everybody just emailing Juan Tontat saying, oh, can I get that app? Can I get that app? And he's just giving it to everybody. And they started telling, there's this real whisper network in police agencies about, what tools are useful. And so it started spreading to other departments and to Department of Homeland Security. The FBI heard about it this way, and to investigators around the world. And so pretty soon, Clearview was being used by hundreds of police departments, and still the kind of public had no idea about it. There had been no debate about whether we wanted police to have a technology like this that allowed them to, search through billions of people's faces to try to identify a shoplifter. Now Clearview has many contracts with many different agencies, but one of them is the ICE at the Department of Homeland Security. That's their biggest contract, and that's the most recent amount that they paid, which is almost $800,000 for 2023. And then there's a random photo of, among the early kind of famous users of Clearview AI was Joe Montana. Because he is an investor and he was friends with somebody that they knew. And Juan Tontat had this funny story about this random guy named Joe who sent him an email asking to use Clearview, and he forwarded it to his partner and said, why is some random guy named Joe asking me for the app? And he said, that's a very famous football player. And Juan's like, I was from Australia, I didn't know. So I think the question now that they have done this is, are we going to let this superpower be in the world? And is what they did okay? So when Clearview AI was first exposed, there was a lot of blowback, and some of the social media companies that had been scraped, had their photos collected and put into Clearview AI's database, sent cease and desist letters to Clearview and said, hey, you violated our terms of service. Please remove the data from your database. Venmo was one of those companies. And it said, scraping Venmo is a violation of our terms of service, and we actively work to limit and block activity that violates these policies. But that was kind of the extent of it. They sent the cease and desist letters, and then no one sued. It kind of didn't go beyond that. So as far as I know, Clearview AI has not removed any of those photos from their database. They did get these letters from Facebook, from Google, from LinkedIn, from Venmo. But it's, this is at the time that Clearview AI first started doing this, it was kind of a legal gray area about whether scraping was legal or not. And they did it hoping that it would become legal. It's still kind of a gray area, but there was a federal court ruling in a case involving LinkedIn that said if it's on the public internet, you can use it. And so, this is very interesting right now in the moment we're in with generative AI and kind of what rights we have to information that's in the public commons. Clearview has been sued in the United States in a few states. The most important or kind of strongest case against it has been in Illinois, because Illinois has this prescient law from 2008 called the Biometric Information and Privacy Act that says that you need people's consent to use their biometrics, or you can face fines of up to $5,000. So the book kind of tells the history of that law and how it came about. It's almost a fluke of history, but it's quite a strong law, and it's been a big problem for lots of technology companies in Illinois that want to use people's faces. The state of Washington actually also has a biometric privacy law, but it exempts photos. So I don't think that there's been any action against Clearview here. So Clearview is continuing to kind of fight those lawsuits. It was sued by the ACLU in state court in Illinois and settled that suit. And one thing it did agree to was that it wouldn't sell its database of 30 billion faces to private companies or individuals, that it would only work with kind of the government and police departments. So that's one limitation that's been put on Clearview. Privacy regulators outside of the United States launched investigations into Clearview. And this is where you see a real uneven distribution of privacy and protections for your face. Because in Europe, they determined that Clearview did violate their privacy laws, that you do need to get consent to collect this kind of private information about individuals. And Clearview was working with police departments outside the US. It stopped after that. Europe effectively kicked Clearview AI out, as did Canada and Australia. And so right now it kind of depends where you live, how protected your face is, because the laws are just kind of unevenly distributed, unevenly applied. I think right now, and part of why I wrote the book at this moment, is that I do think we need to reckon with facial recognition technology. It has gotten very powerful. It is not like it was 10 years ago when I first started writing about privacy, when it really didn't work that well, particularly in the real world. And, I talked about how what Clearview AI did, it was a ethical arbitrage. And so it's not the only person who can do it. And there are now competitors that are much like Clearview AI. There is a public face search engine called pimeyes.com. That's a subscription service. You can pay $30 a month, and it lets you upload a photo of somebody and get other photos from around the web of that same person. The database is not as big as Clearview's. It didn't scrape social media sites, but it's still quite powerful. And they are, the owner of the site lives in the country of Georgia. Its corporate headquarters is in the United Arab Emirates, and their legal services are offered by a shop in Bermuda. So in terms of like how you regulate something like that, it really shows the challenge, given how the internet is global and the laws are so different from country to country. PimEyes, it does claim that it's just a service for protecting yourself. PIM, I think, is supposed to stand for personal information management. And so the idea of PimEyes is that you would only search your own face, and you're trying to find out what your footprint is on the web, which I think is a legitimate use case. But if you have a subscription like I do, you get 25 searches a day. So I don't know why I would just search my own face 25 times a day. So I think one thing we need to think about is one, what control do we have over these databases and whether we are in them? Is it okay to scrape everybody's faces from the database? Who should have access to this technology? And then in terms of the use by police, do we want them to have something like Clearview AI with a database of people that are all around the world? If they do have a database like that, how often should they be able to use it? For what crimes? Can they use it for shoplifting? Should they only be using it for murder and violent crimes? Do we want them, every time they're looking for an unknown person, searching through people that maybe have never even been to their jurisdiction before, that maybe live on the other side of the world? Should they need a warrant every time they do a face search? There's just all these questions that really haven't been addressed yet. The technology is just kind of trickling down to them, and we really need to give thought to how it's being used. So here are some examples of facial recognition technology uses, both good and bad. I talked about how the Department of Homeland Security has that big contract with Clearview AI. It's very popular with child crime investigators because oftentimes they'll get a photo of child abuse, and it's kind of on. So the investigators I've talked to say Clearview AI is incredible for us. It's the first time we have a facial recognition database that includes children. And so we can run something like this and maybe find out who the child victim is, or find out where in the world the abuser is. And so they are really big fans of Clearview. During the war in Ukraine, Clearview, in part, I think, to try to kind of generate more goodwill towards the company, decided to give their service for free to Ukrainian soldiers. And the idea was that they could use it to identify spies or help, displaced people, identify children. And one of the ways that it ended up being used, which many people found kind of creepy, kind of disturbing, was when a Russian soldier was killed, they would use Clearview AI on the corpse to find out who he was, and then to find his social media profiles and find his loved ones, and then send that picture to, a mother or a brother or a relative, just to say, hey, look, like, here is the cost of the war, trying to turn the tide of public opinion back in Russia. We have had, we know, actually, my colleague Ryan Mack is here, and this is a story that we worked on together at the Times. It was what we think is, at this point, the first known case of Clearview AI getting it wrong. And this is a guy, Randall Reed, who lives in Atlanta, Georgia. He was driving to his mother's house the day after Thanksgiving, and he got pulled over by 4 cop cars. And they asked him to step out of his vehicle, and they arrested him for larceny in they told him larceny in Jefferson Parish. And he didn't even know where Jefferson Parish was. He says, what is this about? Where is that? They said, oh, it's in Louisiana. He's like, I've never been to Louisiana before. But he ends up getting arrested and held in jail for a week because Louisiana authorities had requested extradition. And it turns out that somebody had been basically stealing purses there, and they had ran the surveillance footage through Clearview AI, and it matched to the face of Randall Reed. And yeah, it's very traumatic when facial recognition technology goes wrong. And this is one of those questions for police in terms of setting up limits about what you do when it comes to facial recognition technology. Because one of the worst things that happens right now that has led to the arrest of several people, mistaken arrest of several people, all Black so far, one woman who was 8 months pregnant, is that they do the facial recognition hit, get a possible person. It's not always correct. And then they'll take that person's photo, put it in a 6-pack photo lineup, and show it to an eyewitness to the crime and say, which of these people looks most like the person that, robbed you or that you saw commit this crime. And now you've given them a 6-pack photo lineup where the computer has chosen somebody that looks incredibly like the suspect. So you're really kind of setting them up to possibly make the same mistake that has already been made in the facial recognition match. And so some places like Detroit, where 3 people have been mistakenly arrested based on a facial recognition match, say, we can't do this anymore. You can't pair facial recognition with a 6-pack photo lineup from an eyewitness in order to get probable cause for arrest. And I think that is very important and something that any police department that's using facial recognition really needs to do. Finally, I think when we talk about facial recognition technology and how it can be used, that, using it for security purposes makes, I think it's a very appealing use case. Using it to solve crimes, I can understand why people are very in favor of that. But I think one of the problems is that sometimes when you get this infrastructure set up, you have a kind of slippage that happens. And one of the best examples of that is Madison Square Garden. This is an events venue in New York, very famous. It's where the Knicks play, it's where the Rangers play, it's on top of Penn Station, attracts big crowds. And so they talk a lot there about needing to make sure it's a secure space. And so a few years ago, they started using facial recognition technology. And the idea was that it would be used to flag the faces of anybody who was a security threat, like somebody who had been violent there before or gotten into a fight, or, they had some kind of list of banned individuals. And in the last year, James Dolan, who owns Madison Square Garden, kind of famously irascible billionaire, decided, well, it would be really nice to keep out people I don't like, namely lawyers who work at law firms that have sued him. And so Madison Square Garden went through, they had about 90 law firms with suits against them, from personal injury firms to shareholder suits about kind of mismanagement of money. James Dolan is the creator of the Sphere in Las Vegas. If you look at and so they went through and they went to the law firm's websites and collected the photos of lawyers from their bio pages and created this ban list. And it's thousands of lawyers, and it's not just people who work on the case against Madison Square Garden, it's anybody that works at the firm. And I've seen this happen. I went there with a lawyer who was on the ban list, and it's just, before you even present your ticket, as you walk through the door and go through the metal detector, she got pulled aside and they asked to see her ID. And then somebody came over with a note and said, "You're not welcome here. You're on the ban list. You can't come back until your firm drops this suit." And that for me shows, what could possibly happen with facial recognition technology, in terms of or politics, or maybe they don't like that you wrote a bad Yelp review of them. I really think it could usher in this kind of new era of discrimination that's not covered by our existing laws. Possible futures for the technology. So this is a photo from when we first started working on the Clearview AI story, and we were able to get the app and kind of look at it. So it's with two of my colleagues from the Times. And this is a more recent photo of Juan Tontat. And so with Clearview, so he has been working on this Clearview AI app that works with augmented reality glasses, so that you can just walk around and kind of get in real time feedback about who people are. And it looks a little bit like this. There's a circle over someone's face. You tap it and it'll come back with all their photos from around the web, along with links to where they appear and the caption. So it's a pretty easy way to get not just from someone's face to their name, but to where they work, to where they live, who their friends are. And so this is, I think the moment we're at is trying to decide how ubiquitous do we want facial recognition technology to be. Facebook has also talked about wanting to put facial recognition capabilities into augmented reality glasses, and that it would be great. You can go to a cocktail party and know the name of that person that you've met 5 times before, and you still can't remember their name. And I think right now the question we want to ask ourselves is, do we want this to be everywhere? Do we want it to be nowhere? Do we want only the government to have access to it and not everyday people? One thing I've been thinking a lot about in the matter of Facebook is, because Facebook has the social graph where they know who knows who, I could imagine a kind of world in which it's a consent model where you say, okay, Facebook, I'm going to consent in. I'm okay with my face being recognized, but I only want it to be recognized by my friends or people I'm connected to on Facebook, or I'm okay with friends of friends, or maybe you're a very public person and you want everybody to recognize you. And so I think that is one possible way this could go, where you basically have privacy settings for your face in the same way that you have privacy settings for a Facebook profile. A lot of times when I'm talking about this, people ask, well, what can I do? If I don't like this world, if I don't want to just opt into having everybody know my face. And so right now, some people can get out of these databases. PimEye is actually this public face search engine, which is out there. You could go there right now and you can do a search of your photo and kind of get a sense of what they reveal about you, what photos are on you in their database that come up for a search of your face, which I kind of encourage people to do if they just are curious and want to kind of see facial recognition technology in action. And they actually have an opt-out request. And so if you have results you don't like, they do let you remove them from the database. It's totally honorary. There's not a law that's forcing them to do this, but right now they are honoring such request. And so I know I have heard stories from people who, have results that they don't want to come up for a search of their face. A woman who has an OnlyFans account, which is kind of like a online sex work platform, and it was getting linked to her face. And so she went to PIMEYES and requested an opt out, and I tested it for her, and it's not currently showing that. But so that's an option for PIMEYES. And then Clearview is a little bit more complicated. They are only complying with the law, and so this gets back to that idea that your face is better protected in some places than other places. If you live in California or Connecticut or Colorado or Virginia, there are now state privacy laws that say that you have the right to access information that a company holds on you and to get it deleted. So if you live in those 4 states, then you can go to Clearview, see what your results are, and ask to be deleted from their database. We don't have that option in other places, unfortunately, not yet. So that's where I think state privacy laws can be very useful. But yeah, so that's where we are. I'd love to take questions if people have them.
Yeah, first of all, let's take it here. We have a class begin at 1:30, so I'm told that we're supposed to leave somewhat quickly.
Wait, what time is it right now? Sorry, I totally lost track. It's 1:22. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to go so long. Okay. I need like a countdown talk. Well, thank you so much for being here.
There's so much to know. It's coming out. There's no way to go. You know what to share. Oh, you know, you're good. You're good. You're good. You're good. You're good.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Thanks
Thank you for
doing it.
coming.
I
It's
have
good
to
to see
run
you
and catch
again.
a plane.
Oh, no, she does too. Maybe we'll see each other at the
Maybe we'll
airport.
see each other at the airport.